Like me, I'm sure a lot of you listeners are shopping addicts who shop to improve your mood, shop because you like things, and shop impulsively. I know I do that a lot. But do you realize that a lot of the shopping you're doing might have a negative effect on the environment? Think about it. You buy something from maybe states, couple of states away, couple of countries away, couple of continents away. Think of how many stops, how many times it has to move, how many vehicles, how many things it has to pass through to get to you, to get to your house. So that impact of shopping is what today's guest on the Greentech Pulse would like to talk about with us, and that's Mike Robinson. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peter. I'm happy to be here.
All right, so thank you so much. Now, for people like us who shop a lot, can you just tell us what impact we are making on the environment doing that?
Yeah, yeah, and it's a really good question because I think the impacts that we have as consumers, are myriad, right? Right, in terms of the types of products that we choose, based on the materials that are used, based on the manufacturing processes, based on, as you were talking about the delivery process, right? And that's where we are focused more than anything else. I think one of the reasons why I gravitated towards this was, I'm a retailer by trade, right? So it's hard for me to ask people to consume less. I just want them to consume better, right? And I think the notion of one of the things that I did as a retailer was I didn't think about the impact of delivery. And right now, what everybody is focused on is speed, and it creates chaos and creates a lack of organization. What we're attempting to do is challenge that notion of speed and say, is there a better way to say, I'm not going to ask you to buy less. I'm just going to ask you to have it delivered differently. And every time that I can change one of those moments of a package being delivered or a delivery truck stopping in front of your house, it's 800 grams of CO2 that is never created. And when we talk about the billions and billions of packages that are delivered annually, that we're talking about millions and millions and millions of tons of CO2 that probably could be avoided if we just thought about the problem differently.
So, I think, yeah, you're right when you talk about people focused on speed, next day deliveries, probably same day delivery if possible. So now your business is the eighth notch. How does the eighth notch solve this problem? How does it solve this problem?
Yeah, and it's a problem that it goes back to what I mentioned before. It's challenging that notion that speed is the only thing that matters, right? I think that we've all been conditioned to believe that getting it fast is good, right? And I think what we're attempting to do is saying, if you think about the problem and allow things to come to you in a more synchronized fashion, that there's value creation, and there's value creation here that is not only just the carbon savings, but there's financial savings as well, which is what we're looking to incent the companies that ship products to operate differently. It's a simple change. It's determining when something should start its journey to allow it to be able to connect with something throughout the entire delivery network so that it ends up in the back of the delivery truck and ends up in the delivery truck driver's hands when he drops it off in your house. And this can be from multiple retailers that you shop from the same retailer that are doing split shipments and having it come from different locations. But it's about taking a look at time differently, right? And that's really the issue, is that instead of always going, I need to ship as soon as possible, it's I should ship when it makes sense to create value. And we can do this about 15 to 20% of the time that we're able to find a match with something that's already in motion to your doorstep. Or in the case of the split shipment of multiple things coming from the same retailer, about 15 to 20% of the time that we can find ways of connecting that they're coming from different locations based on when they start their journey. The network is incredibly predictable, right? Once it starts, it gets there in just about the time that they said it would. But this is where the carrier came into play and said, if you could figure out a way of breaking the back on this, we know that there's massive operational savings for us as a business that we're willing to share with the retailer. But we also know there's this carbon savings as well. and we want to be able to figure out a way of being able to do it. Doesn't mean you don't have to change the trucks that are being used. You don't have to change the energy that's being used. It ultimately becomes, when done at scale, you're talking about compressing routes and maybe even taking trucks off the road.
Okay. So now, from what you've described, I believe you work with the delivery companies directly.
Yeah. We are in direct business with one of the largest package carriers in the U.S. Right, where you could, I'm under NDA, so I can't mention them. But you could think of the two major package carriers in the U.S. and you'd flip a coin and you'd be right half the time and wrong half the time. But we talked to both of them, and both of them said we love this idea. One of them called back, and the one that called back was the one that we chose to do business with.
Okay. So now, so that means, is it at this point, is it possible for maybe customers, end users to select maybe more sustainable delivery or faster delivery?
Yeah, that's ultimately the play that we want to get to. I think the adoption that we're seeing at the retailer level is, I don't want to involve the customer yet, right? I want to wait until the customer's already made their purchase decision, and now I've got this time window, the customer promise window, as we call it, right? It can be 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 9 days, based on their own business conditions. And what we say is, we'll never violate that window, right? You've made a commitment to that customer that will be there within that time frame. We're just going to use the back end part of this to be able to say, can we find a match with something else that's already in motion to that customer? Because 20% of the addresses in the U.S. shop from five or more retailers on a monthly basis, right? And so there's this massive amount of boxes that are coming. I'm sure that happens in the UK as well, where people are having things delivered to us, right? Lockdown taught us everything can be delivered, right? And so what we're seeing is that massive adoption that happened during COVID, it hasn't changed, and in many cases has just continued to grow as people understand the convenience of it. But that's what we're doing, is we're working with the carrier, because they give us the visibility into several days out of everything that's coming to every delivery address in the U.S., so we can draw the connections to it.
Okay, so now when you look at the current delivery systems being used by most of the carriers to move these products and shopping items around, what would you say are the most inefficient aspects of this delivery, the current delivery system being used now?
Yeah, I would say it is that final mile, right? Because it's not synchronized, right? Everything else that they do, that they're doing in a synchronized manner, but it's that final mile where it's just like, it's available to deliver, instead of saying all of these things should be going to that address on a specific date. What we do know, though, and this is the conversation that we continually have with our carrier partner, is by solving the final mile component and being able to be more synchronized, it has impacts throughout the entire network, right? Because now you're talking about, you can shift volume off of certain days that may be heavy days that you would want to be able to smooth out. You can, change the workload of many of their sort centers, right? In terms of all of the packages coming and going all the way back towards being able to schedule the planes and the large trucks as well. With that simple change based on what happens at the delivery address, and based on when it starts its journey, it has this ripple effect throughout the entire process. I mean, the only challenge that carriers are forced to figure out how to make big capital decisions in order to keep up with the volume, right? And the only thing they can do is spend more money, and all that does is just raise the overall cost structure. There's inherent inefficiencies throughout, but it usually starts with when it starts its journey to when it's expected to be delivered. And if you can figure out the synchronization of that, you can smooth out a lot of this and change a lot of the inefficiencies throughout the network.
Okay, so now this last mile is what you focus on. So why has this last mile, the efficiency in this last mile delivery, why has it been so difficult to solve, at least up till now?
It comes down to the conditioning that everybody's gone through, that fast is better, right? Right. You even mentioned it, right? The perspective of same day, next day, right. That is given this impression of time, and frankly, there's been one retailer that conditioned everybody to think that time was the most important thing, with Amazon, right? Now you take a look at what Amazon is doing. If you check out on Amazon, it's not about speed first. It's about sustainability, right? That they're starting to push that messaging quite a bit. I just wrote an article recently on this in terms of it's the conditioning of the consumer again, right? That Amazon conditioned us to think fast was important. Then they conditioned us to think that Amazon Prime as a loyalty was, and gave us the it's the illusion of free and fast. Well, it's not free, and it's not always fast, right? Because it's based on the. Now they're starting to say, but what if you made better choices in terms of the planet? They're slowly conditioning the consumer. That to me says that the rest of the retailers need to figure out how to do that faster, not be left behind this time because they got left behind the first two times.
True, true. So now for your platform at the eighth notch, can you give us maybe for listeners who want to visualize how it works or know how it works, can you just give us a breakdown of how it works to reduce unnecessary stops in these last mile deliveries?
Yeah. I think the easiest way I would do it is all of us go through checkout, right? And we hit submit checkout, and we go through, and then we just wait for the magic to happen, right? Right. The retailer to pick, pack, and ship, and then the product to be delivered to us. But it's in that time frame between when the order is created and before it's pick, pack, and ship that we do all of our analytics. We'll take a look at the order and say, is there an opportunity either the first time we see it to be able to connect it with something that's already in motion to your house, Peter, right? Or is there a high probability based on the analytics and the AI that we use that if we held it for a period of time, about a day or so, that we might find a connection to it as well. And if we do, all we're doing is saying instead of shipping it today, ship tomorrow. And because of that, because of the way that it'll move through the network, it'll match with that other item that's already been shipped from another retailer at the final sort hub, right, at the carrier level, and then end up in the back of the truck. So instead of the driver showing up on a Wednesday and a Thursday with a package each day, he's showing up on a Thursday with two packages. And that to me and that's the delivery stop removal, right? That's the real creative component here is that driver, doesn't stop at my house 5 days a week. He stops here 3 days. I use an example. I used to work for Macy's, and when I left Macy's, I wanted to buy some things to just make sure I had enough of them. And I bought 5 white T-shirts, 5 basic T-shirts. Those 5 T-shirts came to me from 4 different locations over 3 different days. And it makes very, very little sense, right? Because as a consumer, I'm like, why weren't they able to get me all 5 at the same time? Well, that's because of the inventory and the locations. But the fact that it came from 4 locations wasn't a bad thing if they'd all come on the same day, but they came over 3 days. So if I wasn't, if I hadn't run the e-commerce business there, I would have been calling customer service saying, I got 1 T-shirt today, I got 1 the second day, where are the other 3? What we're trying to do is figuring out ways of taking not only the carbon out of the process, not only the cost out of the process, but improve the customer experience as well. And that to me, I think, is one of those examples of the retailer rushing to ship as quickly as possible because they assume that getting me 1 is better than getting me 5 at the same time.
So now, so now, you just mentioned your experience with Macy's,
Right.
and when you look at different e-commerce platforms, different delivery companies, and cool, what kind of impact do you see optimizing these last mile deliveries? What kind of impact do you see it have, especially on the environment, on sustainability, if this is applied on a larger scale?
Yeah. I mean, at scale, it's pretty massive, right? Right. We're talking about taking, I mean, our mantra as a company is is the route to the most sustainable mile is the one never driven, right? If I can figure out how to just not have to need to do it, right? I'm not doing offsets. I'm doing avoidance here. And the scale that we're talking about, 100 million packages, if I'm able to impact that, I can take out 16,000 tons of carbon, right? That is just never created, right? And there's equivalents that we've done in terms of the number of cars off the road, the number of houses that need energy, et cetera. It's a very, very large impact because of this very, very small change. But ultimately, I think that I'm more after. I want to help the carrier and the retailer work more effectively together from a data collaboration, which is what we do. Is we get them to share data together to be able to collaborate on it to improve the ultimate delivery experience. But if it also minimizes all of the waste that's currently in the carrier network, where else can they invest that, right? Is that savings back to the retailer, which then becomes savings back to the consumer? This is something that our goal is to take trucks off the road. How many? I'm not trying to cap a number on that, right? But I know that I think about, and I live here in the city and on a fairly quiet street, and we get delivery trucks every single day, right? It would be great if there were Tuesdays and Thursdays were the only days that deliveries were done, and Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I mean, I did a podcast about 6 months ago, and there was a gentleman that talked about, maybe this even improves child safety, right? Because, kids aren't, potentially in danger crossing the street. There was another gentleman that talked about maybe this is the basis of smart cities, right? Right. If you can figure out how to organize and coordinate around these things, that right now it's just the assumption is fast is the only thing. We think that synchronized is the way to go.
Okay, so I think in your last answer, you mentioned something about the carrier and the retailer having to share data to make this work and make this simpler. So how um, difficult has this been ensuring that the at least up to date and real time data is shared between the carrier and the retailer, and even making them want to share that data with each other?
Yeah. That and that's the other side of the incentive structure, right? I mean, obviously the carbon piece is the one we've been talking about the most. But one of the things that we did when we started this business and we built this platform is we knew it was going to be a middleware collaboration software, right? I need information from the carrier so I understand everything that's in motion, and I need information from the retailer in terms about everything that's about to be in motion. But why would the retailer do it if they're sitting there and saying, but you might slow me down? And that's a challenge for them, right? And we can push on the sustainability piece, and we can challenge them around, you really don't use that time effectively. But then it became, but what if we could create a financial incentive, right? And so that same delivery stop where the driver doesn't stop, get out, get back in his truck, start, move to the next stop again, that not only is there 800 grams of CO2 that isn't created, but it's several dollars of operational savings as well. And so we went to the carrier and said, would you be willing to share that? And their answer was, if we can get this to scale, absolutely we would share this, right? And so what we've created is a three-way gain share model, right? That the carrier keeps a large piece, they share a piece with the retailer to change this behavior, change the date of shipment, right? And they give us a piece for doing all the analytics and driving that change at the retailer level. It is financially beneficial enough that for some large retailers, it could be considered pennies of EPS that they would be savings here. And I think in a world where people are scrambling for pennies of earnings per share, this is exactly the type of thing, because this is a cost center, right? And it's only a cost center that continues to go up as you continue to drive the service level that you want. But what if you could find a way to be able to either not have price hikes in the future, or be able to get a price reduction because of this, or be able to ultimately start to offer this as a sustainable delivery option to your customers in checkout, which is where we go next with the retail, to say, maybe change the economics of free shipping, right? Because free and fast it's a race to the bottom, right? But what if it became free and sustainable, right? And if you needed it a little bit faster, that there's something in between that one and an expedited ship, and you pay a surcharge. You incent your consumer to say, I can wait, right? I get a lot of boxes, right? Yeah, I honestly don't know when things are showing up sometimes. So why not do it in something where I can actually be enlisted as a consumer to be able to say, I'm willing to wait a little bit longer because you're going to take the most sustainable route to it, because you're going to look to marry it with something else that's coming to my address already.
Okay, so I think the incentives for the retailer are actually very they make a lot of sense. So now, implementing this with the retailers, with the carriers, and everyone, has there been any customer feedback or customer pushback on maybe the speed, changes in efficiency, implementing this?
Yeah, yeah. I would say the number one challenge on the retailer side is the notion of speed, right? And I think that's where we continue to educate by saying, you know, that was the thinking 5 years ago. Your number one competitor, Amazon, is already moving the consumer in a different direction to say, let us deliver it in a pattern that actually is better for the planet, because it's that they don't say it, but it's operationally better for them, right? And if you still need it fast, we're willing to allow you to pay an upcharge to be able to get that. But this notion of believing that everything should be free and faster, I think, is the piece where many people are starting to wake up and say, I can't continue to chase this one, because it's um, it's non-sustainable financially. And then when I start to understand the impact of choice, it isn't sustainable from a planet standpoint either. And I think that is one. The other one is, because we're asking them to schedule a portion of the orders that they've gotten in, they've started to look at some of the operational components inside their distribution centers or warehouses to understand if there is an impact. And what we found is there's very little change, because this normalizes after about the first week of implementation, where all you're doing is just swapping orders from today to tomorrow and the next day to the next day. After about the first week, it normalizes on a volume basis, and it normalizes operational. But I will be honest with you, Peter. That is, that change management component. That is the piece where people got to get their heads on, right, and it's the ones that look at it and say, I can save money. I can help my ESG commitments as well from a carbon reduction standpoint, and I may have to start thinking about my internal operation a little bit better. But the really smart ones look at it and say, what if you scheduled every shipment for me? What if you told me when to ship everything? And those are the ones that are starting to get the connection, right? Because they understand value to scheduling versus, just the only thing possible is I got to get done as quickly as possible because somebody's breathing down my neck. Oh my gosh, the customer needs it, as quickly as possible. So I think that is, overcoming speed, and the illusion of speed is at the top of the list. Secondarily is this notion of potential impacts internal to the operation, but they all get overcome with this financial incentive and this carbon avoidance metric as well.
So now, for I think this field of sustainable logistics, I know this problem the last mile problem you're focusing on is actually really important. But what other innovations in this field of logistics, this field of sustainable logistics, should we be looking out for? What other inefficiencies exist in the?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think there's I've described it as the undiscovered country, right? Right. It's the, I remind myself, anytime I do a podcast that has a sustainability component to it, I'm wearing a hoodie that is made from bamboo, right? Right. So it's a renewable fiber, right? It's about how we, I'm changing from, just buying sustainably to living more sustainably. And so it becomes a question of what happens when you're thinking about supply chain and when you're thinking about logistics. I don't know the actual amount of waste that is in the world supply chain, but all we have to do is take a look back during lockdown when the containers got put on the wrong side of the ocean, right? And everything almost shut down, right? So there's clearly an inherent amount of waste around it in terms of that we haven't figured it out. Now, meanwhile, alternative energies, alternative vehicles, people will continue to look at that. I think there's a perception that we should buy differently, right? Right as well, right? Buy better, right? Whether it's buy less, which is hard for me as a retailer, because I live the world of taking wants and making them into needs. But I think that we're moving in that direction, right? And I think the supply chain needs to come along with it. Uh, I I mentioned earlier, and I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but this small change that we're making to affect final mile has ripple effects throughout the entire delivery process for an e-commerce order, right? Because if we do it, and we talked to the carrier, they were saying if you could take volume off of Tuesdays for me, that would be fantastic because then I could smooth out the network. Then I probably wouldn't have to pay for overtime, and I wouldn't have to have extra planes in the air, and I wouldn't have to have extra trucks moving, right? Because that's a high volume day because of the retail promotional calendar. So if you could take volume off of Tuesdays, that would be fantastic. I think this small change that we're making will continue to have ripple effects as we think about what it means at scale. The scale that I'm focused on right now is delivery stops. But what if we go all the way back through in terms of, that when it starts its journey, that its journey has been optimized to get to you in the most sustainable manner possible and with the least amount of waste associated with it along the way.
Okay. So now for businesses, carriers, for retailers that are looking to make their delivery operations more sustainable and more efficient, like you described, what advice would you give to them to make this happen?
Yeah, yeah. I would say it comes down to the. And again, I apologize if I sound like a broken record. Think about time differently, right? Right. Speed is not the only thing necessary, right? It's the quality of the journey, right? It's the impact of the journey in terms of being able to understand what it means to get something from point A to point B. And are there ways that can challenge the notion of speed when speed is challengeable? There will always be things that need to go fast, right? There will always be things on the consumer side that people want very quickly because of desire or because of a real need. There will always be things in the medical industry that need to go. There will be perishables that always need. Food is very, very tough to slow down, right? Right. You need to get it from point A to point B as effectively as possible. But again, it's this notion, and I've talked, and we've talked to some other companies who, especially in the LTL space, and they're saying we're trying to figure out how to synchronize as well, right? And this notion of synchronizing when things need to get to point B, right? But they're coming from different point A's, and being able to take advantage of time in that to me is it's a mindset shift, and I think that if we can do it for parcel delivery, there's no reason why we can't do it for other parts of the supply chain as well.
Amazing. So now what's your looking at the space where you are and looking into the future, maybe the next 5 or 10 years? What's your vision for the future of sustainable last mile delivery, last mile logistics?
Yeah, yeah. I really wish I had that crystal ball. Right, right. I mean, I do think it is going to be very much more of the you know be thoughtful about what you are asking for when you are making that purchase decision. Right, right. This is effectively every time I'm at Amazon right now. This is effectively what they're doing is they're making me be more thoughtful, and ultimately they're doing it for their own business operation. But they're presenting it as if it's a benefit, and it is a benefit to the planet as well. And this is where I think sustainability doesn't need to mean I have to invest differently. I have to think differently, right? And this notion of what time means from the moment I order until it's delivered is really, I think, the piece of the puzzle that we need to continually challenge accordingly. There will always be, the change in vehicles, the change in fuels, the change in energy consumption patterns. But if we can figure out how to just do it better, there is absolutely no reason why we can't. I would challenge anyone to believe that the world's global supply chain is efficient, right? And I would challenge anyone to believe that final mile delivery doesn't have a lot of juice to squeeze in it. There is juice to squeeze, and I really think it comes down to this notion of thinking about the time from when it starts this journey to when it actually needs to get there, and can you break it down differently from a time perspective? And as we are doing, and we think the most important thing is finding those moments where you can match it up and synchronize it with something else.
Okay. So now for your business, the eight notch, what future plans do you have? What new things should we expect from the eight notch?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been really focused on this notion of to the final a delivery address, but the metaphor works in proximity to it, and then you determine what proximity means. I watch the gentlemen or the ladies who actually stop here in a delivery truck, and they'll get out and they'll service three houses because I live in a fairly dense area, right? And they'll service the house to my left and the house to my right. If you think about servicing an apartment building that has the verticality to it, right, that these become proximity moments where every single apartment in there should be an opportunity to connect packages to it. So that's proximity. But then the proximity just becomes concentric circles, right? If it's 150 feet, if it's the verticality of a building, what if it's a neighborhood? What if it's a zip code? What if it's a city? Right. In terms of how you do that, I think that's where we're going to do. We're going to work backwards, right? We're going to work backwards all the way up to the point that it starts this journey, and look for those concentric circles of where we can find matches that chips away at the inefficiency of it, and drives efficiency in terms of some portion of that. We believe that there's value creation all the way back, even back to the retailer and at the warehouse level, as I mentioned before. If they said, "What if you just scheduled every shipment for me?" Right? Instead of what I do now is it's first in, first out, right? But what if you scheduled everything and tried and found every moment of value that you could that it might have on its journey? That to me is where I've got a product roadmap on the right here, and there are probably 40 or 50 different moments throughout that where we think that we can find some amount of value.
Hmm, amazing. Amazing. So now for listeners of the Greentech Pulse who want to learn more about the eight notch or learn more about you or connect with you or follow your work, check out what you're planning for the future. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, there's probably three ways. Our company website is T8notch, notch.com. We tend to do most of our announcements, and I'll be promoting this podcast on LinkedIn as well, which again is under the Eighth Notch, and also Mike Robinson. And then if somebody wanted to email me directly, it's mrobinson, ROBINSON at T8notch, notch.com.
Okay, so t8notch.com, LinkedIn, and your email, mrobinson at t8notch.com.
That is by far the best way. And if you go through any of those, you'll end up getting to me.
Oh, perfect. So listeners, you've heard that. These will be on the show notes and on the screen for those watching. So thank you so much for sharing your innovation, your technology, your solution with us today on Greentech Pulse. Thank you. And for the listeners, I'm sure you've learned a lot about sustainable delivery. I'm sure you've learned a lot about what goes on after you click on the checkout button. It's a lot actually going on. So I hope by the time you're done listening to it, you're able to think more about how you shop and at least look for more sustainable options when you shop. So till next week when we're back with a new episode, just go through the rest and bye for now.